Chapter 1. The Unexpected Passenger. The corridors of Proxima Station pulsed with a chaotic energy that was familiar yet overwhelming. Merchants shouted over one another, hawking goods from across the galaxy. Crystalline artifacts from the Andrax Nebula, bioengineered fruits that shimmered like gemstones, and even black market tech rumored to be of Valkyrian origin. The air was thick with the acrid tang of engine exhaust and the metallic scent of recycled oxygen, mingling with the aroma of alien spices from food vendors lining the walkways. Captain Elias Ward moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his tall frame and worn leather jacket giving him the unmistakable look of a seasoned spacer. The handle of his plasma pistol peeked out from his belt, a silent deterrent to anyone foolish enough to test their luck. He had been around long enough to know Proxima was a magnet for trouble. From desperate refugees to smugglers looking for a quick payday, the station was a crossroads of the galaxy's most colorful and dangerous characters. Elias had one destination in mind, Hangar 17, where his ship, the Stellar Vagrant, waited. He'd spent the last 2 weeks hauling a cargo of rare, radioactive minerals from the mining colonies on Tarsus 4, and now that his ship was refueled and resupplied, he was eager to leave. The outer colonies awaited, along with another lucrative delivery. His life was built on speed, discretion, and not asking too many questions, a formula that had served him well so far. But as he neared the hangar, a figure stepped into his path, cutting him off. Elias's instincts kicked in immediately. His hand twitched toward his pistol, but he stopped short when he got a good look at his would-be obstacle. She was tall and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly in the station's artificial lighting. It was a pale lavender hue, unlike anything Elias had ever seen, and her eyes large, luminous, and a mesmerizing shade of gold glowed faintly as they locked onto his. Her silver hair flowed down her back in sleek waves, and she was dressed in a simple cloak that did little to hide her graceful, otherworldly presence. "Captain Ward?" she asked, her voice soft yet unmistakably firm. Elias tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Who's asking?" "My name is Kayla," she said, inclining her head slightly. "I need passage off this station immediately." Elias crossed his arms, studying her. Her posture was calm, but there was a tension in her movements, a subtle stiffness that hinted at urgency, maybe even fear. "You and half the people here," he said with a smirk. "I'm not running a taxi service." Kayla's golden eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place. "I can pay." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Credits, cargo, or something valuable. Otherwise, you're wasting my time." Her hands moved to clasp the edges of her cloak, pulling it tighter around her body. "I have no credits," she admitted. "No cargo." Elias sighed, already turning away. "Then we're done here." "Wait." Kayla's voice cut through the din of the station, stopping him in his tracks. He turned back, his irritation tempered by curiosity. "Please," she said, her tone softer now. "I have. Myself." Elias blinked. "Yourself?" She nodded, taking a hesitant step closer. "I can offer my skills, my service. Whatever you require. Just get me off this station." Elias frowned, trying to figure her angle. "What kind of skills are we talking about?" "I am a healer," Kayla said. "I am trained in advanced medical techniques, both organic and cybernetic. I can assist with injuries, illnesses, or augmentations." Elias ran a hand through his dark hair, weighing his options. A healer wasn't exactly what he needed, but he had to admit there was something intriguing about her. And judging by the nervous glances she cast over her shoulder, she wasn't just another traveler looking for a ride. She was running from something. "All right," Elias said finally. "Why don't you tell me what you're running from?" Kayla stiffened, her golden eyes narrowing. "I'm not running." "Sure you're not," Elias said, crossing his arms. "Look, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but if I take you on my ship, I'm putting myself in the crosshairs. So unless you tell me what's really going on, you can find someone else." For a moment, Kayla hesitated, her gaze darting toward the shadows of the corridor. Then, with a resigned sigh, she pulled back her cloak. Beneath it, she wore a form-fitting jumpsuit of alien design, its intricate patterns glowing faintly with a soft blue light. But it wasn't her clothing that caught Elias's attention. It was the faint scars tracing her forearms, crisscrossing her skin like a network of old wounds. "I was a captive," she said quietly. A test subject. The station authorities believe I escaped their labs. They will be looking for me. Elias's jaw tightened. Proxima Station was notorious for its under-the-table dealings, and it was no secret that certain factions conducted experiments on alien species. He had heard whispers of people disappearing, of bodies found in the depths of the station's restricted sectors. He had never expected to come face-to-face with one of the victims. "And now you want me to smuggle you out of here," Elias said, his tone sharp. "Do you have any idea how much heat that'll bring down on me?" Kayla's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "I understand the risk, but I have no other choice." Elias stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing. He had made a career out of avoiding unnecessary complications, and this situation had complication written all over it. But there was something about Kayla, something that tugged at the part of him he had tried to bury years ago. Maybe it was her quiet determination, or the way she carried herself despite the scars on her body and soul. Or maybe it was the simple fact that she looked at him like he was her last hope. "All right," he said finally. "You've got yourself a seat." Kayla's shoulders sagged with relief, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Captain." "Don't thank me yet," Elias said, already turning toward the hangar. "This isn't gonna be a pleasure cruise." As they entered Hangar 17, the stellar vagrant loomed before them in a rugged, battle-scarred freighter that had seen more than its fair share of action. Its dark gray hull was streaked with scorch marks from old skirmishes, and its bulky frame gave it a slightly ungainly appearance. But to Elias, it was home. "Welcome to the Vagrant," he said, gesturing toward the ship. "It's not much to look at, but she'll get us where we need to go." Kayla nodded, her golden eyes scanning the freighter with quiet curiosity. "It has character." Elias smirked. "That's one way to put it." They boarded the ship, and Elias led her to a small cabin near the rear of the vessel. The room was bare bones, with a narrow bunk, a storage locker, and a single overhead light. "This is you," Elias said. "Get settled. We leave in an hour." Kayla inclined her head. "Understood." As Elias turned to leave, she called after him. "Captain?" He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Yeah." "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me a chance." Elias shrugged, trying to play it off. "Don't make me regret it." He left the cabin and headed for the cockpit, his mind buzzing with thoughts. He didn't know what he had just gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. This trip was going to be anything but ordinary. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Void. The hum of the Stellar Vagrant's engines filled the cabin, a low and steady rhythm that usually set Captain Elias Ward's mind at ease. But as he sat in the cockpit, watching the Proxima Station shrink into a glittering speck behind them, unease gnawed at him. Kayla sat quietly in the co-pilot's chair, her golden eyes fixed on the viewport. Her hands rested in her lap, but there was a subtle tension in her posture, as though she were bracing herself for the next storm. Elias couldn't decide if he admired her calm or found it unsettling. "You're sure no one saw you board?" he asked, breaking the silence. Kayla turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I was careful. No one followed me." Elias frowned, glancing at the navigation console. The Vagrant was en route to the outer colonies, cruising through an unregulated shipping lane that was unlikely to draw attention. Still, his gut told him this wasn't going to be a smooth ride. "You've got a lot of people looking for you," he said, his tone cautious. "The station's not exactly known for letting its assets go without a fight." Kayla's gaze hardened, a flicker of something dark crossing her face. "I am not their asset. I was never theirs to begin with." Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You want to tell me what they were doing to you?" She hesitated, her hands tightening slightly in her lap. "Experimentation," she said finally. "They were testing the limits of my physiology, how much I could endure, how my body responded to various stimuli." Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard of such things before, stories of rogue factions and unethical research, but hearing it from someone who had lived it was different. "Why you?" he asked. "What made you their target?" Kayla's eyes dimmed, as though retreating into some inner place. "My species. We are rare. Few of us remain, and even fewer leave our homeworld. The station's researchers saw me as an opportunity, a unique specimen to study, dissect, and exploit." Elias clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. He wanted to ask more, but the rawness in her voice stopped him. Instead, he reached over and flipped a switch on the console, activating the ship's sensor array. "We've got about 6 hours before we hit the next waypoint," he said, changing the subject. "You should get some rest." Kayla nodded, though her expression suggested rest was the last thing on her mind. "Thank you, Captain." "Elias," he said, waving her off. "Just call me Elias." Kayla retreated to her cabin, leaving Elias alone in the cockpit. He leaned back in his chair, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Something about Kayla's story didn't sit right with him, not because he didn't believe her, but because it felt incomplete. There was more she wasn't telling him, and Elias had a feeling it would come back to bite him. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft beep from the console. He leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he scanned the readings. The long-range sensors had picked up a faint energy signature A ship trailing behind them, just outside the vagrant sensor shadow. "Damn it," Elias muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, hoping to lose the tail, but the signature stayed locked on them. He activated the intercom. "Kayla, get up here. Now." Moments later, Kayla appeared in the doorway, her silver hair glowing faintly in the cockpit's dim light. "What's wrong?" Elias pointed at the console. "We've got company. Someone's following us." Kayla's eyes widened, and for the first time, Elias saw real fear in her expression. "It's them," she said. "The station's enforcers. They found us." Elias cursed under his breath. "How? You said you weren't followed." "They must have tracked the ship's departure," Kayla said, her voice tense. "They have access to advanced sensors and surveillance systems." Elias shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Great. Just great. Do they have weapons?" Kayla studied the readings, her expression grim. "Yes. Their ship is equipped with ion cannons and disruptors. If they catch us, they'll disable the vagrant and board." "Not happening," Elias said, his jaw tightening. "Strap in. We're not going down without a fight." The stellar vagrant roared to life as Elias pushed the engines to maximum thrust. The ship surged forward, leaving a trail of blue energy in its wake. Behind them, the pursuing vessel picked up speed, closing the distance. "Can't you outrun them?" Kayla asked, gripping the edge of her seat. "Not a chance," Elias said, his hands steady on the controls. "That ship's built for speed. We're going to have to outsmart them." He flipped a switch on the console, activating the ship's countermeasures. A series of decoy drones launched from the vagrant's hull, scattering in all directions and emitting false energy signatures. The pursuing ship hesitated, its sensors momentarily scrambled. "Nice trick," Kayla said, her voice laced with relief. "Don't thank me yet," Elias replied. "They'll see through it soon enough." Sure enough, the enemy ship recalibrated its sensors and resumed the chase. Elias gritted his teeth, scanning the surrounding space for an escape route. His eyes fell on a nearby asteroid field, its dense cluster of rocks providing natural cover. "Hold on," he said, steering the vagrant toward the field. Kayla's eyes widened. "You're not seriously Dash. Got a better idea?" Elias shot back. The ship plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between massive boulders and tumbling debris. The pursuing vessel followed, its ion cannons firing sporadically. Bolts of blue energy streaked past the vagrant, illuminating the cockpit with flashes of light. "Can this ship handle this?" Kayla asked, her voice tight. "She'll handle it," Elias said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "She has to." The vagrant dodged and weaved, its engines straining under the pressure. Elias's hands flew over the controls, his movements precise and calculated. But the enemy ship was relentless, its weapons chipping away at their shields. "We're not gonna make it," Kayla said, panic creeping into her voice. "Yes, we will," Elias said, his tone firm. "Trust me." As the enemy ship closed in, Elias spotted a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. It was a tight squeeze, but it was their only chance. He adjusted the thrusters, steering the vagrant toward the gap. "Brace yourself," he said. The ship shot through the gap, scraping its hull against the jagged edges. Sparks flew, and warning lights flashed on the console, but they made it through. Behind them, the enemy ship tried to follow, but its larger size worked against it. The vessel clipped one of the asteroids, spinning out of control before colliding with another. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That should buy us some time. Kayla stared at him, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. You did it. Never doubted it for a second, Elias said with a grin, though his hands were still shaking. Kayla leaned back in her seat, her body relaxing for the first time since they'd entered the field. Thank you, Elias. You saved us. Elias shrugged, trying to play it cool. Just part of the job. But as the Vagrant left the asteroid field and re-entered open space, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever Kayla was running from, it wasn't going to let her go without a fight. And for better or worse, Elias had just become part of her battle. Chapter 3. Secrets in Starlight. The stellar Vagrant floated silently in the vast expanse of space, the asteroid field now a distant memory. Though the enemy ship was destroyed, the tension aboard lingered like a heavy fog. Elias leaned back in the pilot's chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest. The ship's hum was the only sound until Kayla spoke. They won't stop, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Not until I'm dead or taken back. Elias shot her a glance, his irritation barely masked. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. Care to explain why you're worth chasing halfway across the galaxy? Because this is starting to feel a little above my pay grade. Kayla hesitated, her golden eyes darting to the floor. I didn't want to involve you. This is my fight, not yours. Elias let out a sharp laugh. Your fight? Lady, they just turned my ship into a shooting gallery. That makes it my fight too. Kayla's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she seemed smaller, her usual grace dimmed by guilt. There's something you should know, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I couldn't tell you before. Elias leaned forward, his expression hard. Start talking. Kayla drew a deep breath, her hands clutching the edge of the console. You know, I was part of their experiments treated as nothing more than a specimen. But what they didn't realize is that I wasn't just a random target. Elias frowned. What do you mean? Kayla met his gaze, her golden eyes shimmering with intensity. I carry something they want, something they'll do anything to retrieve. Inside me is an encoded biotechnological blueprint. It's a weapon. Elias froze. A weapon? What kind of weapon? A virus, Kayla said, her voice trembling slightly. A pathogen that can rewrite DNA at the cellular level. It's designed to incapacitate any species it's introduced to, rendering them vulnerable or compliant. They wanted to use me as the key to unlock its full potential. Elias's stomach churned. He had heard of bioweapons before shadowy stories of entire colonies wiped out by invisible killers. But this was something else entirely. And you're just walking around with it inside you? He asked, his tone sharp. It's dormant, Kayla explained. For now. But if they capture me, they'll activate it and unleash it on the galaxy. Elias ran a hand through his hair, muttering a string of curses under his breath. You couldn't have mentioned this before I let you on my ship? I didn't think you'd agree to help me if you knew, Kayla admitted, her voice tinged with regret. But now you understand why I can't go back. Elias stood abruptly, pacing the cockpit. This isn't just about you anymore. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about a galactic-scale catastrophe. Kayla nodded. That's why I have to destroy it. I've been trying to find a way ever since I escaped. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Elias asked, crossing his arms. There's a research facility in the outer colonies, Kayla said. A neutral station run by scientists who oppose the use of bioweapons. If I can get there, they can safely remove the blueprint from my body and neutralize it. Elias narrowed his eyes. And you're sure they won't just take it for themselves? Kayla hesitated. I trust them. That makes one of us, Elias muttered. But if it means getting these lunatics off my back, I guess we don't have much of a choice. The Vagrant pressed on, its engines humming steadily as they charted a course toward the outer colonies. Elias spent the hours fine-tuning the ship's systems and double-checking their defenses, his mind racing with contingency plans. Kayla kept to herself, alternating between periods of quiet meditation and assisting with minor repairs. Though the tension between them had eased slightly, the air was still thick with unspoken questions. Elias wanted to trust her, But every new revelation added another layer of uncertainty. Was she telling him everything? Or were there more secrets lurking beneath the surface? It was during one of these quiet stretches that the alarm blared. Elias jumped to his feet, rushing to the cockpit. Kayla was already there, her glowing eyes fixed on the holographic display. A new ship had entered their vicinity, its sleek design and angular features unmistakable. "Valksorian hunters," she said, her voice tight. "They found us." Elias's jaw clenched. "How the hell are they tracking us?" Kayla's expression darkened. "They must have a beacon, something transmitting our location." "Great," Elias muttered, scanning the ship's systems. "I'll deal with the beacon. You keep them busy." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "How do you expect me to do that?" Elias smirked, grabbing his plasma rifle from a storage compartment. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." The Valksorian hunters wasted no time, closing the distance and launching a barrage of ion blasts. The Vagrant rocked violently, sparks flying from the console as systems flickered and strained. Kayla worked quickly, using her advanced knowledge of alien technology to reroute power and stabilize the ship. Meanwhile, Elias stormed toward the engine room, determined to find the beacon that had led their pursuers straight to them. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, scanning the machinery for any sign of the device. In the cockpit, Kayla continued to outmaneuver the Valksorians, her hands flying over the controls with precision. The ship's shields were holding, but only barely. She knew they couldn't take much more. "Elias," she called over the intercom, "we need that beacon offline now." "I'm working on it," came his frustrated reply. As Kayla adjusted the ship's trajectory, she noticed something odd, a faint signal pulsing in sync with the Valksorian ship's movements. Her eyes widened as she realized the truth. "It's not the ship," she whispered. "It's me." Elias finally located the beacon, a small, inconspicuous device hidden within the ship's secondary engine core. He yanked it free, tossing it aside as it emitted a faint whine of protest. "Beacon's gone," he said over the intercom. "We're clear." But Kayla's voice stopped him cold. "Elias, it wasn't the ship. They're tracking me." "What?" Elias demanded, rushing back to the cockpit. Kayla turned to face him, her expression grim. "The blueprint, it's emitting a low-frequency signal. As long as it's inside me, they'll keep finding us." Elias stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Then we need to move faster." Kayla nodded, her golden eyes glowing with determination. "Yes, but we can't outrun them forever." Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing. They were running out of time, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But one thing was clear. Kayla wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the key to something far bigger than either of them, and Elias wasn't about to let her face it alone. Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The stellar vagrant hurtled through the void, its engines pushed to the brink. The once reliable hum of the ship now carried an ominous tone, strained and uneven. Elias Ward sat in the pilot's seat, his jaw set as his hands gripped the controls tightly. Beside him, Kayla monitored the radar, her golden eyes flickering with unease. The Valksorian hunters had regrouped faster than either of them anticipated. Two sleek attack crafts now pursued them relentlessly, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space with bursts of searing plasma. "They're gaining," Kayla said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Shields are down to 25%. Elias cursed under his breath. "We're not making it to the research facility with them on our tail. We need another plan." Kayla glanced at him, her expression grim. "If I eject the signal source, the blueprint, they'll stop chasing us." Elias snapped his head toward her. "You can't be serious. You said that thing's tied to your biology. How are you going to eject it without killing yourself?" She hesitated, her hands clenching the edge of the console. "There is a way, but it's dangerous." "Of course it is," Elias muttered. "Let me guess, it's something you conveniently forgot to mention earlier?" Kayla met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't think it would come to this, but there's a procedure, a failsafe encoded into the blueprint. If I override the containment protocols, it will force the data to externalize into a physical device. Once that happens, I'll no longer be the carrier." Elias frowned. "And what happens to you?" "I'll survive," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "But it will leave me vulnerable." Elias slammed his fist against the armrest. This is insane. Even if you pull it off, those bastards will grab the device and use it anyway. Kayla nodded. That's why we destroy it the moment it externalizes. Destroy it? Elias repeated. Do you know what happens if we mess that up? We'll turn this entire sector into a hot zone. Kayla's gaze hardened. Then we can't afford to mess up? Elias guided the vagrant into a dense asteroid field, weaving through the jagged rocks with practiced precision. The Valkyrian ships followed, their weapons tearing through the debris in pursuit. Plasma bolts exploded around them, sending shockwaves through the freighter. Kayla worked quickly at the console, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. She accessed the failsafe protocols embedded in her biology, bypassing layers of alien encryption. Each step sent a jolt of pain through her body, but she pushed forward, her resolve unshaken. How's it coming? Elias called out, his voice tense. Almost there, Kayla replied, beads of sweat forming on her lavender skin. Just keep us alive a little longer. No pressure, Elias muttered, jerking the controls to avoid another volley of plasma fire. The ship rocked violently as one of the Valkyrian crafts scored a hit on their aft engines. Warning lights blared, and smoke began to fill the cockpit. Engines are critical, Kayla said, her voice strained. We're losing thrust. Elias gritted his teeth. You better hurry, or we're toast. Kayla completed the final override, her body convulsing as the blueprint began to externalize. A small device, no larger than a datapad, materialized in front of her, its crystalline surface glowing with an eerie blue light. She grabbed it, her hands trembling. It's done, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias glanced at her, his eyes widening. You don't look so good. I'm fine, she said, though her pale lavender skin had turned a sickly gray. We need to destroy this now. Elias nodded, activating the ship's cargo bay. We'll jettison it into the asteroid field and blast it from a distance. Kayla handed him the device, her hands shaking. Be careful. Even dormant, it's dangerous. Yeah, I got that part, Elias said, securing the device in a containment pod. The vagrant banked sharply as Elias maneuvered it toward a dense cluster of asteroids. He launched the containment pod, sending it hurtling into the debris field. The Valkyrian ships, realizing what was happening, redoubled their efforts, their weapons tearing through the asteroids in an attempt to retrieve the device. Fire everything we've got, Elias ordered, his fingers dancing over the controls. Kayla activated the ship's remaining weapons, sending a barrage of missiles and plasma bolts toward the containment pod. The Valkyrian ships tried to intercept, but the combined firepower overwhelmed them. The pod detonated in a brilliant explosion, sending a shockwave rippling through the asteroid field. The pursuing ships were caught in the blast, their sleek hulls torn apart by the shrapnel and energy surge. One was obliterated instantly, while the other spun out of control, its engines flaming before it crashed into an asteroid and exploded. Silence fell over the cockpit as the explosion's light faded into the void. The vagrant drifted, its systems battered but intact. Elias let out a long breath, slumping back in his chair. Is it over? Kayla asked, her voice weak. Elias glanced at the sensors, confirming the destruction of their pursuers. Yeah, he said. It's over. Kayla closed her eyes, her body sagging with exhaustion. Thank you, Elias. Don't thank me yet, he said, turning to her. You look like you're about to keel over. I just need rest, she said softly. The process took more out of me than I expected. Elias stood and moved to her side, helping her to her feet. Come on. You're no good to anyone like this. He guided her to her cabin, where she collapsed onto the bunk. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Elias lingered for a moment, his gaze lingering on her pale features. You're not allowed to die on me, he said quietly. We've come too far for that. Kayla's lips curled into a faint smile. I'll try not to. The next day, the vagrant limped into the outer colonies, its hull scarred but its crew intact. They docked at the research facility Kayla had mentioned, a neutral station orbiting a barren planet. The scientists there welcomed her with open arms, promising to provide the care and protection she needed. As Kayla prepared to disembark, she turned to Elias, her golden eyes shimmering with gratitude. I wouldn't have made it without you, she said. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Elias shrugged, though his expression was uncharacteristically soft. What can I say? I'm a sucker for lost causes. Kayla smiled, stepping closer. You're more than that, Elias. You're a good man. Before he could respond, she leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the station. Elias watched her go, a strange mix of relief and longing settling in his chest. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but one thing was certain. She had changed him, in ways he couldn't yet understand. As the vagrant departed the station, Elias stared out at the stars, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something worth fighting for. And though the galaxy was vast and uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. Not for him. Not for her. Not for her.